Hello, everyone, and welcome to our VR for Business series, the first of which is focused on virtual reality for HR and training. We will be recording this webinar today and sending it out when it's complete. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, there's a Q&A box, and we will also have time for questions at the end. As an introduction, my name is Sabrina, and I've been a part of Saritasa for about 6 years now and work in our marketing and sales departments. I'm currently located out of our New York office. Before we get started, I wanted to give you guys a brief overview of Saritasa. We are a custom software development company headquartered in Newport Beach, California, with additional offices in Los Angeles, New York City, Chicago, and Austin. We were founded in 2005 and got our start creating business websites and have focused on finding innovative technology solutions for businesses ever since. We have experience across top verticals and types of development technologies, from web to mobile apps, to IoT, and of course, virtual and augmented reality. Our speaker today is Aaron Franco. Aaron has spent the past 20 years working in several different areas of technology, including engineering, IT management, professional services, and training. He also has an extensive background in education and training, including helping to launch a New Horizons Learning Center franchise, spending 5 years at the global technology distributor Ingram Micro, and helping to support the training services division, as well as obtaining a Bachelor of Science in Education from the University of Wisconsin. He holds certifications including Certified Scrum Master, CCN, and Microsoft Certified Professional, and is currently the VP of Immersive Technology at Saritasa. Aaron, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Sabrina. Appreciate the introduction, and welcome to those who are joining us today. And as Sabrina mentioned, we are going to be recording this, so we'll be sending out the recording afterwards in case you miss it, or if you have to drop early for any reason. We expect about 45 minutes and then some time for questions. So as we move forward, if you do have questions, there's a Q&A box. Please use that. And again, we'll try to leave some additional question time at the end. So as we get started, we're going to cover 4 main areas today. Again, this is a beginning of a series. We're going to be focusing on the usage of VR for training and HR purposes. So we'll talk about why you should consider VR after we do a brief intro on immersive technology, just so we're all on the same page. Take a look at a few examples just to get your mind going about how you might be able to do similar things that other companies are doing today. And then talk about how do we develop a successful VR project. Developing virtual reality projects is quite different than doing a lot of different software development. So we'll talk about some of the similarities and differences, and then of course some next steps. So when you registered, one of the things we asked you to do was answer a couple questions just to get a sense of who is joining us today. So as you can see, the majority of the people on the call have used VR 1 to 5 times. So you've been in some sort of headset, maybe had an experience at a trade show, but are not a frequent user. So we're gonna focus for those people who have had an experience, but maybe not extensively. About a quarter have not been in a VR headset at all. And then, of course, about a third have used multiple times. And then additionally, we asked about a full-time training department or resource. It appears about 2/3 of you are probably managing the training using a part-time resource, outside resources, or just doing it yourself. So again, this is kind of the focus that we'll take. Some people may have one full-time resource, so a lot of these things may be relevant as well, but this should be applicable to everyone. All right, so now that we know who's on the call in the video, just want to get started. This is a great quote, I think, for especially VR technology and immersive technology today, and it's inspirational for where we are in the week in the middle. The past is gone, the future is not here. Now I'm free of both. Right now I choose joy. What this is saying as it relates to immersive technology is things are changing really, really quickly. It's not the type of thing that you can look at and say, well, I'm going to wait until the next thing comes out, because you're going to be continually chasing, doing nothing really. So take advantage of what's available today. The technology has really advanced extremely well in the last year and is in a really good place for businesses. So we're going to talk about what we've got today. There's a lot on the horizon, but we've got a great opportunity to develop something useful to achieve business outcomes today and focus on what we've got right in front of us. So just to level set, there's a lot of terms around immersive technology that you may hear. So I want to just cover a few of them. Obviously, we're going to focus on virtual reality today, but I don't want that to be confused with other things like augmented or mixed reality that you may have heard of or experienced in other ways. So starting in the upper left, 360 video is something that falls into a number of these categories. It's something where you can be inside of a headset or some sort of experience and look around, or even on YouTube, you can drag your cursor or move your phone and you see the video follow you around and you're able to get a real live look. What you can't typically do is interact. So it's more of a passive experience with 360 video, but it is a powerful tool to use inside of an experience. Augmented reality, we'll go into a little more depth, but again, this really overlays a digital experience on top of the real world. And at this point, the primary method for getting that experience are mobile phones. Everyone's got one, and that's what's typically used. Mixed reality is mostly a term that Microsoft came up with around their HoloLens product. It does do some additional things, and we'll take a look at that from what your typical augmented reality experience is, but they are very similar in terms of seeing the outside world and overlaying digital content on top of that. Immersive is really the term that captures all of these things, but it really is, it's a practice of making sure that you're providing the true experience that you can get from these technologies, rather than making it just gimmicky or really not taking advantage of the fact that you can have different degrees of freedom inside of a headset. Which brings us to virtual reality. Again, this is a completely immersive experience where hopefully nothing comes in from the outside unless you're sitting on something or some sort of experience that allows you to feel what's going on. But primarily, it's all inside the headset. It's a completely digital world that you are inside. So the blanket term that we tend to see with all of these things, everyone's trying to come up with acronyms that capture whatever the latest is XR. So extended reality is what that stands for. And if you do hear that term, that refers to pretty much all of this stuff. So starting with augmented reality, here are a couple of the ways that you may experience it. Again, on the right, you'll see Pokemon Go. On the left, you see some glasses. Apple is looking at coming out with some augmented reality glasses in 2022. These sorts of technologies are in their infancy as far as wearables that are comfortable, small, look natural. Obviously, we all remember the Google Glass from a few years ago, but this is starting to take shape. And again, the idea is that you're taking some digital element and overlaying it on top of the rest of the world. This is, again, mostly at this point used in more of a application of entertainment or some sort of assisted reality that someone else can be accessing what you see and give you some instruction. That takes a lot of processing power, so that's where we start to look at things like mixed reality from Microsoft. This is the HoloLens 2. I've done a few of these experiences with the HoloLens. It's definitely impressive. The idea behind it is to really take the data that's available within an experience and maximize that to help you do things that may be difficult to do, or visualize or share and visualize data. But it gets a lot more into, I guess, the objective of trying to look at very complex things and give some assistance through mixed reality, where it helps to see the outside, but most of what's happening is truly happening inside the headset. And then that moves us on to virtual reality. What I've got pictured here, I don't know if revolutionary is too much to say, but the Oculus Quest came out in May and has outsold its expectations. It's outsold every other headset. It's at a $400 to $500 consumer price point, and it's wireless. It's not tethered. It provides a pretty decent experience, and it has a good battery life. They're coming out with some new accessories. Oculus is owned by Facebook, so they're really focusing on this. I see this untethered experience continuing to improve. It allows for more freedom, and people are really starting to enjoy it. So As this technology matures, we see people focus more and more on giving this a shot and getting a great experience for their business. The picture you're looking at on the right is an experience that we created around fire extinguisher training. So as you can see, you can kind of wander around and use the headset in a way that's gives you a realistic experience of putting out a fire, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. All right, so we're going to do a quick poll just to get started and ask, have any of you ever participated in virtual reality training as part of your job? So just go ahead and click, that should pop up on your screen. Go ahead and click on the answer. Looks like we've got overwhelming no. So 100% of you have not. I'm going to go ahead and pop those up where we're at today or right now. Have not. So a lot. Oh, we've got one. All right. So we've got 1, 6, and 1. Good. All right. So one of you has participated in that. So it's obviously not a very common thing at this point. I'll show you some examples of some larger companies that are doing that today, and then we'll talk about, whether, regardless of the size company you're at, how you can get started with that today. So moving along. Jump back in here. All right, so let's get started. Why should you consider VR for training and HR purposes? This is a study that I really like because it actually looked at 22 different studies to understand what were the improvements when they looked at VR. So this is basically, as they look at a study, did it indicate that there was, one, increased learning? Yes, 83% of the studies showed increased learning. Strong learner preference for VR and AR, and that's especially true when you get to younger people. They are very comfortable with it. They look forward to those types of things in the business place. It seems natural. So strong preference, great recruiting, great to show people that you're progressive. 100% of the studies showed fewer errors, increased learning persistence was the same, and then reduced time performing tasks. So can we put people in a headset and help them learn how to do things quicker? 3/4 of the time, the answer is yes. Now, what does this look like in the real world? Here are some companies that put out real statistics who are currently working with VR training and onboarding. Boeing showed a 40% productivity improvement. That's obviously huge in a production facility. Thinking about how do you do more with the same without having to invest in additional, you're already training these people, so obviously just doing something different is showing an incredible improvement here. Learner retention rate. This is one of the biggest statistics that I continue to see is, when they take people after 6 months and ask them questions about their training, the retention is just astronomical compared with traditional learning methods and e-learning methods. UPS here showing a 75% learner retention rate increase. Tyson Foods, they're concerned with injuries and illness on the job, and they showed a 20% year-over-year drop in those statistics. Walmart is definitely the leader in virtual reality training and have showed a 15% increase in test scores through the work they've done. They also will look at a couple case studies of some of the work that they've done as well in different areas. And then United Technologies showing a 40% reduction in onboarding time. So this not only comes from some of the activities that you do, but also the fact that with virtual reality, you don't need people to travel a lot of times. So if the idea is, hey, we need somebody to come to global headquarters and it's going to take a day travel each way plus a day or two there, you can cut a lot of that out. Maybe you just want to give them the experience of touring the facility, or it's some sort of specialized training where you need to send people off site. Looking at your training costs, we'll do that later when we talk about ROI, is a great way to reduce onboarding time. All right, so on to the examples. We're going to take a look at 5 different examples of how companies are using VR today to improve learner outcomes and address onboarding challenges. There's a lot more out there. The ideas are limitless depending on what your budget and your mind can come up with. But we'll take a look at a few just to give some examples and hopefully get you thinking. So the first one is, it's a very serious topic, but you can look at the application across many different businesses. So this is an example from June where the company that creates tasers put together some training for the Chicago Police Department to help them with empathy training. So the example here that you're looking at, it shows an autistic person who walked out of a store with a toy they were playing with, and then of course when the police approach them, things get really tense. And so it allows people to make mistakes in difficult situations without people getting hurt. It allows them to practice things over and over again until they really understand. If you take something that's a little bit less serious, like sales training, for example, giving a salesperson different things to look at as far as, whether it's difficult customer situations or it's customer service, a lot of these things allow you to put other people behind the eyes of the customer, or behind the eyes of someone calling in with a problem. So these are good examples. This is obviously a very serious one that could help save lives, but it also, again, allows you to both put yourself in difficult situations that you're not going to want to put people through, other people through, and also make it simpler because it's all inside the headset. All right, next, I mentioned this earlier, but obviously compliance training is big from both an onboarding perspective, also annual training. This is an example of OSHA training that's required. A lot of people don't know this, but if you have people who are allowed or required to be able to use the fire extinguishers inside of a commercial building, it's required that they're trained upon employment and then every year afterwards. Now, the requirement is pretty basic. You have to look at a worksheet, basically acknowledge that you read it. If I'm a business owner and I've got people who are responsible for this, I don't know that that really makes me comfortable that that's quite enough. So this is a great opportunity to put somebody inside of a headset, learn about the different steps of how to use a fire extinguisher, put them in a stressful situation where there's alarms going off and they have to pick the right fire extinguisher for the type of fire, and allows them, again, to choose wrong and do it over again. And when they're finished, they get a certificate. So then you could print that, show that, keep that in your file. Not only be confident that, again, with retention being much, much better, that you're probably putting people in a much safer situation, but you're also able to show through data that this person completed the following steps and they've now passed the compliance training. So great opportunity if you've got compliance training that you need to provide to your employees to use virtual reality, especially if there's a step-by-step or a decision-based process that needs to take place. So back to another serious topic. We really don't seem to be able to go very long between school shootings and workplace shootings and shootings of just random commercial buildings. There was a study from published in SHRM about the concerns of HR professionals, and currently 45% of the 800 that were surveyed said preparing for and responding to an active shooter or workplace violent is very or extremely challenging. And I think we can all guess why. It's because you're not really able to take an entire workplace down for an afternoon to do this type of training or put them in realistic situations where there's someone wandering around with a gun, even if it's not real. So it really makes it difficult both for people in a workplace and then also the people responding. So in this case with this image, there's a company who does provide this type of training for police departments, and they give them, if you look at the wrist, you'll see that there's special attachments there so they can really track everything that's going on within that headset, puts them in a realistic situation of how do I respond, how do I identify the shooter, and that sort of thing for police. And then Walmart also does, again, being the leader in VR training right now, had made a statement after the El Paso shooting from their CEO that the VR training helped save lives. So there's really no better commercial for VR training than that, showing that, despite the fact that there were lives lost, the fact that their employees had felt like they had been in that situation before made them better prepared and better able to respond. And next, again, another, this is a great use case that's a little bit nerve-wracking probably to those of us who are a little bit older, but Walmart is looking at skills-based testing. So You know, we all know if we've interviewed people before, you can talk about what you know, but really demonstrating it is a completely different thing. So as we look at how do we effectively test a person in a real situation when it may not be reasonable to put them in that situation just for pre-employment testing? I think this is a great opportunity. It doesn't need to be very complex, but again, just seeing how people respond. One of the great things about virtual reality is the amount of data that you can collect during the experience. While you're in the headset, you can track things like where are they looking, how long are they looking there. If it's an example of something they need to inspect, did they look in the right order to different things? Did they select what they needed to look at? Or again, just passing a simple ABC in order test of what you needed to do. So great technology for this. I think, again, as people also move up the ranks and we want to be able to see how they handle certain situations. I know another thing that Walmart has done is Black Friday training. So how do we put people in a situation where the store is overwhelmed with people who are trying to kill each other to save $3 on an item? That's good training both to prepare current employees, but also to put employees into that situation and see how they respond. Are they ready to manage the team that's going to be taking on that situation? All right, and then finally, as we look at manufacturing and some of the, again, kind of task-based activities, VR is a great way to train people. We not only saw things like better learner outcomes and better retention, but we saw a preference for VR being very, very high. So being able to take people, especially if it's a high turnover type of job, and make their jobs interesting both while they're doing it and in training, really shows great results. And so this FedEx case study is a good example of how they're both using it to train and help people find the best path forward and deal with safety concerns, make their jobs easier and better to do. So with that, we'll take a look at, after some examples, we'll take a look at what you need to consider to develop a successful VR project. I just call this the 5 Ds of a successful VR project. We'll cover each one briefly. So the first thing we need to do is discover the opportunity. We really need to take a look at your business objectives, areas that this may make sense. This is a new frontier for most people. So it may not be readily obvious where you want to start. You don't want to just go in and say, hey, we're going to completely replace a day-long training session with VR, because that amount of time in a headset, for example, may be too much. It may just also not make sense. People aren't ready for that, but we definitely can start small, find a great opportunity, and expand from there. Next, develop the business case. So why do we want to do this? Why does this make sense for our business? Obviously, this is something that's going to need to be funded by the executive team or yourself in the business. We want to make sure that this makes sense for you. And we'll go into detail a little bit more about these. Defining the outcome and objectives, whether it's learning outcomes, business objectives, we want to make sure that this isn't just entertainment. Now, maybe entertainment is your objective because you want employees more engaged. That's a fine objective, but we want to make sure that it's defined and it's not just by accident that we create something that's interesting but sort of fizzles out and really doesn't drive the types of ROI that you're looking for. So speaking of that, once we've determined the first 3 things, it helps us take a look at budget and ROI. The cost of a immersive technology project can range from very small to very large. There's movie studios who spend years and years creating massive projects, and we've got clients who are creating amazing products that only take a month or 2 and are very focused on specific activities, create a great outcome, great ROI. But the first thing you really need to do is determine what you want to do, why you want to do it, what the outcome is, and then what kind of budget do we want to spend on this so that we can constrain everything else within that and still provide good ROI. And then finally, we move into design and development. We'll just do a quick overview of what our process is for that. All right, so just quickly covering the first D, discover the opportunity. What you want to do is take a look at your training or onboarding characteristics of what you do. Do you have, as we mentioned before, are there compliance requirements that you have that maybe the training occurs via e-learning or in person, but you want to have some sort of demonstration that that person can actually achieve what you've taught them, and you want to record that? VR is a great opportunity for that. Are things highly complex? Is it very difficult to recreate in the real world? Do you need to get inside of a human body, or do you need to be, breakdowns of some sort of equipment? Those are great use cases as well. The biggest things we see are safety or dangerous training, safety concerns or dangerous training. Obviously, there's really no downside in VR. If something really bad happens, you do it again. So it's a great way to avoid the risk that can be inherent in certain training. Again, in practical training, sort of falls into that similar category. If it's exam-based or scored, and you want to be able to take the data from the VR experience and import it into an LMS or some sort of scoring system, this allows you to do that. Again, not only in your step 1, step 2, step 3, or did I answer the multiple choice question right, but it also allows you to collect so much more data about the actual experience that the person goes through inside this that you just could not really collect any other way. Are you suffering from limited retention or engagement, or is retention extremely important, where as the retention falls off, you start to see marked decline in productivity or revenue? If that's the case, this is a great opportunity, as we've seen, to improve retention and then improve those things. And then just a very easy one-to-one scenario is hands-on exercises. So anything that you do with your hands, you can build in VR and maybe make it a little more interesting, a little more effective, or maybe, again, measure the kinds of data that you want to see that it's hard to measure now. And then as you continue, so now you've identified some of these opportunities, and you look at what are the costs associated with this, whether it's hard costs or soft costs. Travel is an obvious one. If you're sending employees to another site for whatever reason it may be, if you can avoid that, there's an immediate hard cost savings. Are you hiring instructors? As we see, 2/3 of you don't have a full-time training department, you're probably hiring third-party instructors. Can you minimize that time, or can you do without completely? You have to send people to different facilities, or you don't have room inside your business, so you're renting out space. And then there's just the downtime, whether it be equipment or just people, of traveling to and from training, or being involved with it. Productivity losses if you've got to take down a machine, for example, in order to do training. That can be huge. Materials and equipment, when you look at things like pharmaceutical manufacturing, the training that they have to do with real supplies, and those supplies can cost thousands of dollars for every training that they do. So again, great ROI, great opportunity there. All right, so looking at the business case. So we've looked at what is the opportunity, what is the ROI, what is the business case that we're trying to solve for. So is this training that's required for most or all employees, or onboarding for all employees? In this case, there may be just economies of scale that make sense as we look at this business case for virtual reality training. Likewise, if it's training that's only for a few employees and that doesn't really scale well, so we've got really high employee costs as it relates to this, that's another good area to look at and think about. You have a lot of younger employees that are in a certain area. So some businesses, they may have sales and marketing at a headquarters, and then they've got manufacturing or some other production, which may bring in a lot of younger employees. Whatever the case may be, they're very apt to use this technology, very interested in it. It makes you look like a much more progressive company, and people appreciate that. And then likewise, as employee turnover medium or high, are you doing the same training over and over and over and over again that, again, could just be put into a VR experience and provided as employees begin their onboarding process? And then finally, as we look at the types of training, again, we talked about this earlier, as a task-based. Are we looking at product knowledge or demonstration? Do we want people to be able to learn about what it is that we sell or that we do, and then also show that to other people? Or are we taking this to trade shows where we're trying to show potential customers, maybe we create something that's so big that we can't ship it, or it just isn't practical to do that, but we want to bring it to them. How do we demonstrate this outside the confines of our own facility? We talked about certification and compliance, whether it's technical or legal. Again, we've given a few examples of onboarding in HR. And then soft skills. This is an area I really think is ripe for development within VR, especially as we start to see things like voice recognition become much more powerful. So if any of us have done sales training where we get taken to an off-site retreat, we buddy up with another salesperson and we pretend to sell each other, I personally think that's some of the least effective training ever, because essentially you're not selling to a real customer, you're not getting real objections. You're effectively just trying to get through it. Same with customer service training. I think there's definitely space for role playing, but when you can do it and you're looking at another person who is asking you the hard questions and you're in the safety of being able to answer that, again, maybe do it wrong and then do it over again, it creates a much more realistic situation and has shown really great results both in sales and customer service. All right, so now that we've defined what we want to do and why, let's look at outcome and objectives. So if you're in the training business, this is obvious. This is stuff that you look at whenever you're creating any sort of learning path for a person, is what are we measuring? We want to get better retention. All of the things that we've shown here are statistically shown to be improved with VR. So really it's just a menu to pick from. Which of these things do we want to include as part of the ROI for what it is that we're creating? So obviously a lot of these things tie into reduced costs, reduced risk, and so on, that we'll talk about when we look at budget and ROI. Okay, so in order to create the budget and to really understand what is the value of this training that we're going to invest in, we start to look at things like this. So adding some sort of percentages or numerical measurement to these elements is where we can start to do the math that comes up with the budget. So, you know, what is the percentage of retention we want over a certain number of months? And then we can monetize, what does that mean for us? So, you know, right now people are forgetting things after 2 months, and we see that in that very same period of time, production drops off or errors increase, and that costs us money. Those are things that we'll extrapolate again into really a math equation to understand what this is worth. So looking through this list, and again, I'll send this out, so if you want to use this as a cheat sheet as you look at your portfolio, you can definitely do that, or we can help. Do you want to increase the feedback? Sometimes the training world is a tough one in HR. Everyone just sees it as sometimes, hey, I got to go do that in the middle of everything else. How do you increase people's positive idea about what it is that you're doing and feels good about it? That in itself is a great objective. Again, accident reductions, productivity increases. These are all simple things that we can go ahead and move forward. All right, so now we're looking at how do we create the ROI? How do we figure out the budget? So first thing, as we talked about things like training and downtime, what are the direct and indirect costs? Then we select the objectives and the KPIs that we outlined. And then after that, we really basically just do the math. So if we're saying we want 10% fewer production errors, and we're going to achieve that through one of the means that we talked about, we look and see that's going to actually result in $150,000 in savings. So there's a number to start from as we look at this training. Same with travel. If we're going to minimize travel, it sure would be great to be able to go into budget planning and say, well, hey, we're gonna save $100,000 on training this year, or on travel this year, by investing $100,000 in VR training, and then every year after it's going to be double that. That's a great message to be able to give, and very realistic. All right, and then the final step is actually getting in designing and development. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we go about doing this. Every company is different, but we find this to be the most effective way to deliver a good business-to-business product as it comes to virtual reality training and onboarding. Our biggest focus is on preparation. We see this as incredibly important. You're essentially creating a novel or a movie or some sort of experience. So, the technology fits the experience. It's not the other way around. And we make sure to spend a lot of time up front really understanding what is the story of the person who's going to go through this. And we will write this out, as dialogue to really understand what we want this person to experience. Then we tie that into business objectives. If you're a software company and we want to put somebody in empathy training to understand all the difficult things the customer goes through each day when they don't have your software, we certainly want to make sure that all those activities can tie back into the benefits of that software. So we're really starting with what's the story, what's the experience, what are the objectives. We then create an activities list and then start to focus on navigation and guidance. For those of you who've been in a VR headset before, it can be a little bit unnerving if you're all of a sudden thrown into a situation and you don't naturally know how to get around. Even if you have a large space to walk, it's usually not large enough to experience everything. So for the most part, you really, really have to think about the comfort of the person who's inside the headset, how they're going to navigate. The better you make this feel, the more successful they're going to be. If they're just confused when they get inside, it's not going to work regardless of how well the rest of the experience is built out. And the other thing to consider is how long you want that person inside the headset. Some people may be able to take, 3 to 4 minutes. They've done one thing, they're good. Other people can sit in there. I've watched movies inside my headset and I'm fine, but other people, do have some issues. So it's things you want to consider up front long before you get into the technology of this. At that point, that helps us define certain things like, what do we want this to feel like? We start to create the idea around 3D assets, the media that's going to go in this. So do we need voiceovers? Do you want the person to hear the CEO talking about the history of the company? So we're going to have to schedule time with your CEO and a sound team to capture that. Or are we looking at taking 360 video of a headquarters, or do we need realistic depiction of some sort of asset that we're looking at, or will just something generic work? All those things impact the cost and the experience and are things that we need to discuss and figure out up front. Again, as we go through this storyboard and design aspect of development, it's all about feedback. We use an agile development process within VR, which provides just a constant feedback loop, very short sprints of what it is that we're doing, so that we're making sure we don't get too far ahead, just to realize that there's something very fundamental about the experience that just doesn't quite match up with what you want to accomplish. So again, we add an element of production management on top of everything else. A lot of companies will just use project managers and designers and developers. We actually add producers in the mix so that there's someone who's constantly working with you from the look and the feel, working with the team internally to make sure that that experience side is correct and feels right, and working with all that feedback. And that way, when you do get the experience from us, it's a lot closer to where it needs to be. So constant feedback. We go through a prototyping phase where we put you in the headset. You're actually in there experiencing what's going on. And then we go through with formal approval, project delivery. Depending on how you want to integrate these devices, we can provide the devices with the software on them. We can do some device management for you. There's a lot of different options as you deploy, and then ongoing support and maintenance to be considered that we can work on with you. So with that said, that's basically it. We'll open it up for questions in a minute, but we do want to invite everybody in. If you haven't met with our team before, we can do it over the phone or in person, but would love to just sit down and brainstorm. If you've got ideas of things you've been thinking about, we can take a look at your portfolio and looking at all the elements that we talked about, give you some ideas about where it might make sense to start, or just give a walkthrough of the technology. If you haven't been in a headset, we definitely invite you in to come experience some of the things we've created, and then just some other VR opportunities within that. course, we also do augmented reality and are open to those as well, but this is focused on that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead. I'll open it up to questions. First things, we'll take a look and see if there are anything in the Q&A. Doesn't look like there has been. So if you do want to ask a question, I think everyone's muted right now, so I'm going to unmute. And if you do have a question, why don't you pop a Q&A box and I will actually unmute you that way. That will work better. All right, obviously I covered everything. So again, we will be sending this out. If you do want to get in contact with us, please reach out to your salesperson who you've worked with in the past. If you haven't worked with anyone, you can also feel free to reach out to me directly and I can get you in touch with the right people, or we can just chat about whatever it is that you're interested in talking about as it relates to VR. So just take one more quick check, see if there's any questions. Doesn't seem to be, so I appreciate everybody's attention today. I hope you have a great holiday, and I hope that we hear from you soon. Thank you very much.